ownership that we can give players over content feels like a very meaningful new dimension. That, by pulling that out just a little bit, we, add tremendous amount of area to that player value. So maybe we don't need as much content and didn't need it as high quality. If the player made it, they're really into it. This is my guy from Grand Theft Auto. His name's Mo. He doesn't really do the missions. He's kind of a slacker. He rides his bike all day and learns new little bike tricks on his bike. But I love it when he goes into the cutscenes. This guy's wearing his, cute underwear and his Barbie watch, and they take him very seriously in the game somehow. But, after I play the game, I go tell my daughter and my wife stories about what Mo did today. And, I find that, ownership over, the experience translates for me into much more meaningful stories. I never go tell somebody, the story about the cutscene I just saw in a game. But I'm always telling people about the weird, crazy thing I did that was very, unique to me. Very, I really owned the experience and I was driving the story. I was playing the story. And so I contend that player stories will always be more powerful than scripted stories that we try to tell the players. And I'll kind of revisit that a little bit later. So we've got these trends kind of going from, more linear gameplay to more open-ended, steeply rising content costs that we're fighting, the value of player-generated content, metrics that we can capture from the players. So perhaps a more accurate title for this talk today is going to be what I learned about content from The Sims and why it's driven me to procedural methods. Now, I started way back on the Apple II. Remember this? A great machine. And it was 6 times faster than a teletype. But this is actually from one of their ads. Back then, we programmed everything, just, right down to the metal in, machine code. We actually had memory maps. We knew where everything was in memory, which is kind of cool. And actually, what was in memory, about half of it was code and about half of it was data. The memory was in such short supply that we had to, use as little data as absolutely possible. Today, that ratio is probably more like 100 to 1. Then this happened. CD-ROM came out, and at that point, compared to the amount of memory we were dealing with, and these little tiny floppy disk drives with 140K on them and stuff, this thing was, a supertanker. We could not conceive of this much data. Where in the world are we going to get all the data to fill this sucker up? And so the trend started moving toward, finding ways to create lots of data to pile into our games. And one of the games that kind of really exemplified this for me, well, actually, before I talk about that, this basically was kind of like the meteor that came in and sounded the death knell for the algorithm, in some sense. This is when data, started to really ascend and reign supreme, in our industry. And one of the games that really exemplified this for me was Myst, which was a very elaborate slideshow. It was actually done in HyperCard. Robin and Rand, I thought it was a brilliant game. I loved Myst. I loved all their games. And the fact that they managed to do this in HyperCard as a slideshow, but yet still make you immersed in this world, was absolutely remarkable to me. And one thing that always occurred to me, though, playing Myst, was that, there's this really cool immersive experience, but they had a great time building this world. And I kept thinking that over and over, boy, this is kind of fun to be in, but I wish I could have made this world. That was the fun part. Now, while the rest of the industry was kind of, going off into the data-driven, let's fill up a CD-ROM with lots and lots of content, there was actually kind of another tribe on the other side of the world that kind of kept the old ways. They basically worshiped the algorithm, kind of kept practicing their black arts. They adopted kind of modern dress and technology. And that tribe seems roughly centered on Northern Europe, Scandinavia, ground zero around Helsinki. And we call it the demo scene. And these guys are basically crazy. They'll take, these little tiny things at 64K and through algorithm generate huge amounts of animation and visual stuff and music and sound and just amazing things algorithmically, procedurally. And just to give you kind of some sense for how insane that is, if we take that 64K and we square it again, and again, and again, and again, and again. Okay, that's a CD-ROM over there. Okay. So, why in the world were they doing this? What was the point? They actually evolved out of the cracking community. They would crack games and then kind of sign their name, put a little screen at the front saying who cracked the game because it was kind of a little competition they had. And then eventually they got more animated, more elaborate visual. eventually got very cool, and if you haven't seen any of these, I really encourage you. And then they have these rituals. They get together and practice their black arts together. And anyway, I just kind of found this just incredibly inspiring over the last few years.